Okay, members, I declare this meeting open to the public and welcome you all to the 23rd meeting of the Public Accounts Committee in this 22-27 mandate. Can I advise members that the committee meeting will be recorded and broadcast throughout Parliament buildings and online. However, there could be a slight delay in moving into any private or public session, so please be patient. Can I also advise those in the public gallery they're welcome to use their mobile devices as long as they're in airplane mode and that all devices are muted. You can connect to the Assembly Wi-Fi. The password is in the gallery rules and it's not permitted to take any photographs or recordings of this meeting. Okay, Claire, have we any apologies?
No.
No. Okay, draft minutes. Can I refer members to the pack for a copy of the draft minutes in the meeting held on the 24th of October at page 7 of the pack. If members are content, I'll sign them. All agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you. Okay, members, is there any member who has a relevant declaration of interest to declare for this meeting? Yeah.
Yeah, just on item 4.1, I'm on the audit committee as well as this committee.
Thank you. Okay, members, last week we discussed the Northern Ireland Audit Office budget submission for 25-26 and agreed to write to the Audit Committee in support of the submission. The draft letter is at page 19 of your pack. Our members, if you have it in front of you, are you content with the letter? If you want to consider it. Okay. Thank you. Okay, members, you'll recall that following our evidence session on major capital projects on the 3rd of October, it was agreed that a number of further questions would be submitted to the Head of the Civil Service for a written response. At page 21 of your pack, you will find a response from Hawks as this relates to our inquiry on major capital projects. Are you content that we discuss this in closed before we proceed to agenda item 7?
Yep.
As it forms our basis for the evidence inquiry. Okay. So we're going to discuss it in closed.
Yep.
Okay. Okay, members. We're now in public session. Can I welcome to the meeting Michael Scholes from Raise? You're very welcome, Michael. Thanks for being with us and for being so patient with us as well. Members, you'll recall that a piece of research was commissioned during the inquiry into major capital projects into public sector skills gaps. Given its relevance to our forthcoming inquiry on developing the skills for Northern Ireland's future, I'm going to ask Michael to brief the committee. A copy of this particular paper is at pages 115 to 141 of your tabled paper. So, Michael, you're very welcome. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, I'll give you a brief overview and hopefully that'll leave plenty of time for questions. So the paper really provides a high-level overview of the skills system in the UK and Northern Ireland. The first section then presents a summary of the current Northern Ireland skills landscape, including background information on the Ulster University Skills Barometer, OECD Skills Strategy for Northern Ireland, the DFE Skills 10X Economy Strategy, a new skills fund and the setting up of a new Northern Ireland Skills Council. So now I'll talk a wee bit about the Skills Barometer because it's of particular relevance. The Skills Barometer really is updated every 2 years and it provides a DFE with an evidence base for skills demand across Northern Ireland. It uses qualifications and divides these into 3 main levels. So the first level really is low or no qualifications, and that's qualifications at level 2 and below, so that's typically 5 GCSEs and below. Secondly, then we have mid-level qualifications, which is at level 3 to level 5, and that is typically 2 A levels, for example, or the equivalent professional technical qualifications, up to level 5, which is HND, for example. And then lastly, you have the higher level qualifications, which are degree and postgraduate. So according to the Skills Barometer, the latest Skills Barometer in 2022, 83% of Northern Ireland respondents said that their organisations currently face skills gaps. So next then on section 2 on page 8 of the paper, it summarises recent developments in England, Scotland and Wales. In England, the development of Skills England was only established recently, so it's really a little bit too early to assess any of that performance. Its remit really covers England, not the rest of the UK. However, it has said that it will assess any skills needs across the whole of the UK, so we'll have to wait and see what happens there. In Scotland and Wales, there's been a lot of reviews really since COVID, and the most significant change really in terms of the Welsh Government is the new Commission for Tertiary Education and Research, which covers all post-16 education and training. Section 3 then on page 12 presents 2 case studies. Firstly, the Jobs and Skills Australia, which is an independent statutory body established in 2022. Its role is to advise and assist the Australian Government on the skills needs of the Australian economy. It reports on occupational shortages, and figure 2 on page 13 there of the paper shows a sample shortage list for a construction project manager. Obviously there's a list of different occupations and you can select them. It's also working on a national skills taxonomy which categorises the various skills in each occupation. The JSA have also developed a number of jobs and skills councils that consult with industry, undertake data analysis and develop training products. Each council publishes workforce plans each year as well, and they detail skills shortages and other workforce challenges in those areas. The second case study concerns the New Zealand Government, and they have developed a policy skills framework to identify skills and practices for workers in the New Zealand Government and the wider public sector. The framework really allows managers and staff to identify the knowledge, behaviours, applied skills and practices required for effective policy advisors. Now, figure 3 on page 15 of the paper shows the framework triangle, and it really sets out a list of skills descriptors that staff can use to assess their own and their team's current and future skills needs. And I have a sample of that. It's shown at figure 4 of the paper as well. Now, using the information contained in the relevant descriptors, the staff can map their skills profile using a supplied worksheet, and there's a sample of that at figure 5 on page 17. And finally, staff can then use a development pathway tool that highlights any on-the-job or formal training that they need. So it's kind of a complete package to assess and address skills needs within the organisation. And that pathway tool is at figure 6 on page 18. So, and obviously as you click on through the pathway tool, it can actually lead you to the different skills, qualifications and the courses that may help you develop in those particular areas. So finally then, section 4 discusses some key issues or challenges with relevance to skills in Northern Ireland. It also, what I've done is also included some scrutiny points for the committee at each of the subsections. The first challenge is really how to define the skills that we need in the Northern Ireland public sector. So there isn't really, in Northern Ireland, there isn't really an agreed set of definitions for skills that are needed in the civil service, for example. And that point was made by the office, the Audit Office report, capability and capacity and capability report. And in box 3 on page 20, I've listed the recommendations of that report. I'll just read out the first one because it's quite relevant to this. It says the NICS should formally identify the professional, technical and functional skills it requires to successfully deliver current and future government programmes. So the second challenge that I've listed is how to overcome the fragmented nature of the skills system here and across the United Kingdom. And scrutiny points on page 23 address this particular challenge. Other challenges include the impact of the skills gap on the public sector workforce, and also assessing the future needs of the skills of the public sector, particularly in light of the increasing use of AI technology and the move towards a greener economy. So, Chair, that's a very brief overview of the paper, and I'm happy to take any questions you may have.
Thank you, Michael, and thank you for the work that you've done on this. It's very, very helpful. We appreciate that very much. I'll go to a few members. Colin?
Yeah, it's maybe more really a comment, I suppose. And funny, I mentioned about catching up with the bus at the launch of the Child Poverty Report. In regards to this, when I'm thinking about it now, we're so far behind, we're almost in danger of getting the wrong bus at this stage. Like that identification of what skills we need now, given the changes has been even within the past 12 months, never mind, like things are changing so quickly. That's a fundamental part of it. But then I suppose separate that, once you do that, the other basics around having the right integration to provide the skills training remains the same. But I suppose the question of how much you have to go back to go forward to get the right skills identified now, or how much time that takes.
I think one of the central tenets of the whole piece really is the lack of a coherent system. There's so many different, as I mentioned, it's fragmented, and it's the same in the UK. And Skills England is one example of trying to, and the developments in Wales as well, is an attempt to get a single government body who's going to look at skills in the future, as well as training needs, as well as the whole sort of post-16 education piece as well. So it's
I'm sorry, it's not just fragmented, it's competing. They're actively competing with each other. Fragmented would be bad, competing is worse.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks very much for the paper. Just a wee handy question for you, I suppose. You've identified Australia and New Zealand there. I mean, we done a good enough report into, capacity in NICS, and they had identified a number of things. Looking at that, there's some good models there, good barometers. I mean, I was saying, in what you've studied and what you've researched, are you identifying those two that's possibly a way to go? I'll put it in this context because I think if for years the private sector didn't need government all in some of the policy changes, and I've noticed a change probably over the last 10 years here in my experience that there has been a lot more engagement. Now you can say maybe after COVID and even, but my point is if we can't get it right here and develop here, then I can see the private sector's coming back to us, Chair, in some ways, to be honest with you. They'll always be able to develop in their own right, especially the bigger companies. But for ourselves, my question is, trying to learn, because you research the papers in New Zealand and Australia, is that possibly a way to go? Because as part of this conversation, Chair, I asked, doing this paper was how to retain people within the civil service as well, you know what I mean? But just your view on as you've done research.
Yeah, well, they were selected as best practice, really. Especially, I think the New Zealand one's particularly interesting because although it was initially set up for policy advisors, so that's a pretty narrow outlook. It can that template, if you like, and that system of templates can be used. You can lift that idea. The whole idea of first identifying the skills that are needed. And the piece and how you do that, and then so the way that they've done that is to allow staff and their teams to map their own skill sets at the moment to see where they are, and then use that template. So I'm just going to get to the page. I think it starts on page 15 of your paper. So they identify the skills needs at particular levels. Now I've used the policy analysis one there. As a skills descriptor on page 16, but there's a whole list of different ones that you could use. So if you think of that in terms of this committee and your capital projects issue, you could have that for construction, you could have that for any number of type of occupations, and you could have a look. The way that they've done it, they've obviously set it as a developing member of staff or whatever, a practicing one, so that's somebody at a sort of mid-level, and then somebody who's leading the organisation, what skills that they need. So they've done that sort of bespoke piece that sort of gives us a pathway, if you like, also to any promotion. And so by identifying those descriptors, that's the first set, because as you quite rightly mentioned, and I talked about it earlier on, the skills that we need, nobody's defined them. There's no single set, and that's mentioned in the Audit Office report as well. There's no set of skills that we need. That we're linked very much to qualifications, and the skills barometer discusses qualifications, and that's really useful. One of the reasons why qualifications is used, because the data's there.
Yeah.
So there's all this data of qualifications that are easily accessible. We can just lift the data and go, right, these are the skills gaps. But they're not really skills gaps, they're qualification gaps. So we need to describe the skills first, and then apply something like this New Zealand approach, in my opinion, as an example of best practice.
Okay. Colin, were you looking to supplement what you said earlier, or is it entirely separate?
No, it's a different issue.
I'll go to Dan first now. Dan?
Thank you. Thanks very much for the report. It's really, really useful, especially comparisons with other areas. For me, I think it's the most concerning thing is the, page 19, where you're basically outlining how we don't have a common definition of skills. So what are we talking about? Because every single one of us around this room will have a different idea of what we mean by the words skills. Like you talk about, some people measure it by qualifications, some people measure it by a lot of different things, and I think that's the fundamental problem that we have here in terms of how we define what skills are before we move forward to measure them. And then you kind of go on there to say that the recommendations, like the recommendation of the Audit Office report was that the civil service conduct a review to define and identify skills gaps. Should they be doing that on themselves? If they've got their own perception of what their skills functionality is, would it be better for an external body to come in to actually assess that for them? Because we've heard it before. We've heard it, in hearings, for example. We had procurement where they were saying, we should have 140 staff, we've only 120, there's 20 vacancies, we don't have the skills. But have they actually assessed the staff that they have? Maybe they do have the skills base there. So it's just in terms of, like, do you think that it should be within the civil service that they outline this in themselves, or would it be better to have an external review?
I mean, I can't really answer that particular point, but hopefully it'll be helpful that the way that I would answer that particular question is that in the Australian example, where they're trying to come up with a kind of a national taxonomy for skills, to do that very thing that you were talking about, describe what exactly are the competencies or the skills and experience or whatever that you need in these particular roles. And without that, you can't really go anywhere, so you need that as a starting space. So I think that's really useful looking at that. And also Skills England are doing some work in that as well, but it's very early for that to happen. But I'm just looking at the scrutiny points there as well, that whenever I was talking about that whole idea of developing the skills taxonomy for Northern Ireland and specifically for the civil service, you would have thought it would be a relatively straightforward thing to do. Certainly in the civil service, the wider public sector perhaps might be more problematic, but I would have thought it would be a good step, good first step anyway, to do that in the civil service.
No, definitely, because they have the core competencies, and as that elevates through the different standards, you have people moving around at grades because they're hitting that degree of competencies. But it's just, when does it become a specialised skill? Like, what's the difference between a competency and a skill? So but just having that, as you say, just commonality of agreeing at what the definition is of that, I think is pretty just fundamental to the whole thing. It sounds quite simple, but whenever you start getting into the detail, I just think every single one of us probably has a different idea in our head of what that means. I think with the
infrastructure projects, you're absolutely right, where it gets to that level of, the skills aren't there, but they don't really know what they need, so they just will go to the private sector in the past or whatever and say, we need this, we need that, but without knowing really what we need. That's the issue there.
Thank you, that's really useful.
Thanks. Colin?
Yeah, so we have a very highly advanced manufacturing hub in Mid-Ulster in the South Tyrone area. Skill shortage was so severe there, and this was work I was involved in with them over the past 5 years. They have created their own organisation called MEGA, which is Manufacturing, Engineering, Growth and Advancement. They're now at the point where they're looking at setting up their own academy to drive the skills forward. Would you have any thoughts about how we could integrate that type of focused work into the overall environment?
Yeah, I am aware of that through the work of the Economy Committee. I think has discussed that, and certainly members in your constituency on that committee have definitely talked about that. But that's something I could look at, in a broader piece about that. But absolutely, I think that would be. The academies are a good, and the academies are a really good example of that. And maybe the Department for the Economy might be, well, there would be better place to describe what's happening there, but that seems to be a very good initiative. Particularly this is a very broad sort of overview of skills. It didn't go into apprenticeships or academies or anything like that, but that's something that perhaps this committee or the Economy Committee, I know they're already looking at it, but it's certainly something worth thinking about.
Okay, Cheryl?
Thank you, and thank you so much for the report. It's very, very useful. I suppose I was looking at the University of Ulster's barometer, and it was quite shocking to see the figures. So in terms of careers advice, I know you haven't covered it within that report, but careers advice, obviously you would receive that potentially around that 5th year or upper 6th in school, and it's a critical juncture for a young person to decide where they want to go. So do you feel that there needs to be extra resources and support, particularly at that stage, that can allow a young person to have support and to know exactly where may be the best place to go for them, what skills they need, and then fundamentally what job that they could enter if they take that path?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a crucial point,
Yeah.
and the Economy Committee are looking at this as well. I know for a fact. In the new Skills, Northern Ireland Skills Council has members of the council that are in education, and they have senior teachers, head teachers, so there is a mixture of people in that. The Audit Office report was previously quite critical of the, I think, of not necessarily the Skills Council, but the amount of times that they could meet. They are very much a sort of a part-time kind of setup, whereas Skills England and the Welsh, I think they're called MEDER, the Welsh, I think that's Welsh for the Commission for Tertiary Education. You know, they are a single body totally dedicated to this issue, and it doesn't seem to be that in Northern Ireland, but absolutely would agree that the school piece is vitally important in that. Yeah.
Appreciate that. As someone who done social studies, I can see that I am in oversupply, but I do I do think I mean
Take those figures down a wee bit there, just in case
there is definitely a part to play for social studies, but no, I appreciate that. I do think it is a very important piece of this work that we can work to try and improve for people as well. So thank you.
It's serving you very well.
Oh.
Sure, just a final point. I mean, to be fair, I mean, and we might quote the New Zealand piece when we're having conversations when they're up, but it's surprising because over a number of years now we've looked at all the pieces of legislation as best practice out there, and we've used best practice. It's surprising following the report then the Audit Office has done that we hadn't. Now, it's come up in conversation with different committee, but it's surprising that hasn't approached itself before now, you know what I mean? But it gives us food for thought, I'm
Just
Very quickly, just to follow on Cheryl's, and this is what I was saying earlier, is the careers advice is at 16, 17, 18 years old, and you're going social studies, but it's too late at that stage to actually give a careers advice to go for engineering or the law, because your subject choice is already preventing you for moving that. So in one way, we need the careers. Has anything been done with that? Looking at what age or where that is to be, where that advice should be, because if you drop the subjects earlier, you can't then pursue it later. But then we're creating the courses. We're still having those courses available when we've got an oversupply of them, rather than the colleges adjusting the levels of courses and the levels you can enter those courses at to bring this parameter kind of more level, more balanced.
Yeah, well, all I could say on that is the Skills Council have different subgroups. As you're aware, perhaps you work in the Economy Committee as well, that they would be absolutely looking at that issue. As I said, there are teachers, head teachers on those subgroups. So I think, and also in fairness to them, that it's quite a new group, and there is the Skills Fund. There's a lot of money available in the next coming year. So I think really, things will evolve and things will start to come through that will look at those particular areas in the future, and I think the Skills Council has a really interesting role to play there.
Okay, thank you, members. Thank you, Michael, for that. An important piece of work, and as you can see, we're very interested in it. So thanks for your work on that. Okay, members, we'll move into closed session for the next item, which is the formal consideration of the draft report. And
Committee Room 30, sound. Committee Room 30, Sound.